Every day before the sun rises, a girl goes out to sell fruit and help her family. While many ignore her effort, she stands firm, carrying discipline and dignity. But upon crossing paths with a wealthy and indifferent man, something begins to change silently. And this encounter awakens a transformation that goes beyond what anyone expected. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing. The alarm clock was never necessary in Juliana's life. Her body had learned over the last 3 years to respond to the silent call of 4:30 in the morning, when Belo Horizonte still slept wrapped in the cold of the Minas Gerais dawn. She opened her eyes slowly, adjusting her vision to the dim light of the tiny bedroom she shared with her 2 younger sisters, Beatriz and Amanda. The mattress creaked softly when she stood up, careful not to wake anyone. Every movement was measured, calculated, part of a choreography she repeated every day with the precision of someone who cannot afford to make a mistake. In the cramped bathroom, she washed her face with cold water that chased away sleep for good. She looked at herself in the blurred mirror and saw the usual reflection, a 17-year-old girl with deep brown eyes, black hair tied in a practical ponytail, and an expression that blended exhaustion and determination. Juliana knew she wasn't beautiful by the standards she saw in the magazines at the corner newsstand, but she had also learned that beauty didn't pay the electricity bill. What mattered was getting up early, working right, and returning home with enough money to help her mother. Donna Marta was already in the kitchen when Juliana arrived, preparing the simple coffee that would be the morning's fuel. Her mother was 42 years old, but she looked much older. Her work as a cleaner in 3 different houses had marked her body with back pain and swollen hands, but it had never managed to erase the affectionate smile she reserved for her daughters. "Good morning, my daughter. Did you sleep well?" Marta's voice was soft, almost a whisper, so as not to wake the girls. "I did, Mother. You also need to rest more." Juliana took the bread her mother offered and ate quickly, standing up, while mentally reviewing the day's list. "Rest is a luxury, Juju. We rest when we can. For now it's work." Marta served the coffee and stood watching her daughter with that mixture of pride and sadness that only a mother knows how to feel. "Are you going to Tiasa today?" "Yes, I am. I need to get the fruit before 6. The movement starts early in Savassi." Juliana finished her coffee and grabbed her canvas bag, already worn by time. Inside was the little notebook where she recorded every cent earned and spent, a habit she had developed on her own to never lose control of the money. "Take care, my daughter. And don't take nonsense from anyone, do you hear? You work honestly. You owe nothing to anyone." "I know, Mother. Don't worry." Juliana gave a quick kiss to her mother's forehead and went out into the still, dark street of the Lindea neighborhood in the northeast region of Belo Horizonte. The bus was full of workers like her, people who woke up when the rest of the city was still dreaming. Juliana knew some faces by sight, but she never talked much. She preferred to use the commute to organize her thoughts and prepare herself mentally for the day. Getting off at Ciaza, the supply center of Minas Gerais, was like diving into a parallel universe of movement, shouting, smells, and colors. There, among trucks and endless stalls, Juliana carefully chose each fruit she would sell. Her supplier, Sir Joaquim, was a 60-year-old man who had always treated her with respect. He knew Juliana's story, knew the family's struggle, and because of that, he made a point of setting aside the best fruit at the best price. "Today I have silver bananas that are a beauty, girl, and Formosa papayas you won't even believe." Sir Joaquim showed the products with the pride of someone who understood the trade. "I'll take 3 bunches of bananas and 5 papayas, Sir Joaquim, and if you have good Tommy mangoes, I want 10. Juliana examined each fruit, feeling them delicately, checking the consistency, the color, the signs of ripening. She had learned to do this on her own, observing, failing, succeeding, until she developed an eye that few had. "You know how to choose, girl. You're becoming a professional." Sir Joaquim smiled while packing everything carefully. "I'm already a professional, Sir Joaquim. I'm just waiting for the diploma to arrive." Juliana returned the smile, a rare flash of lightness amidst the seriousness of the routine. At 6:15, she was settled at her usual spot on Rua Pernambuco, one of the main arteries of the Savassi neighborhood, a noble region of Belo Horizonte. There, The contrast between her reality and that of the residents was glaring. Elegant buildings, imported cars, expensive restaurants, designer stores. Juliana organized her improvised styrofoam box as a counter, arranged the fruits with care, smoothed the clean towel underneath, and stood there, waiting for the first customers. The first hours were always the best. People hurried to work, stopping quickly, buying and moving on. Juliana served them politely, gave the correct change, and thanked them sincerely. Each sale was a small victory. Each bill in her pocket was another brick in the construction of a future that was still hazy, but that she believed existed. Around 9 in the morning, when the sun was already punishing the sidewalk, and Juliana felt the fatigue rising through her legs, a black car stopped right in front of her spot. It was a model she didn't recognize, but it clearly cost more than her family would earn in 10 years. The dark window rolled down slowly, revealing a man of approximately 40 years in an impeccable suit, a watch that sparkled on his wrist, and an expression Juliana immediately identified: absolute lack of interest in anything that wasn't himself. Eduardo Almeida was well known in Belo Horizonte. A businessman in the real estate sector, heir to a consolidated fortune, and owner of a reputation as a difficult, demanding man who did not tolerate incompetence. He looked at Juliana as if he were looking at a lamppost, an element of the urban landscape that simply existed there without any relevant purpose. "Young lady, you are obstructing the view of the building." His voice was dry, cutting, with no room for a reply. Juliana felt her blood rise, but she kept her calm. "Good morning, sir. I work here every day in this same spot. I don't obstruct anyone." "I don't care what you do. This sidewalk is no place for that." Eduardo didn't even look at her properly while speaking. His eyes already turned to his cell phone. "I have the right to work, sir. I'm not doing anything wrong." Juliana's voice remained firm, but inside she felt the humiliation growing. "Right?" Eduardo gave a short laugh, devoid of humor. "You think you have the right to occupy space in a noble area because you sell half a dozen fruits? Get out of here before I call the city hall." He rolled up the window without waiting for an answer, and the car pulled away, leaving Juliana standing there holding a mango she had in her hand, feeling tears sting her eyes, but refusing to let them fall. Around her, some people had witnessed the scene, but no one said anything. It was always like that, people like her invisible until they became an inconvenience. Juliana took a deep breath, swallowed the knot in her throat, and went back to arranging the fruit. She couldn't afford to stop, to give up, to falter. She had a tired mother waiting at home, 2 sisters who needed to study, bills that didn't pay themselves. That man in the black car was just one more obstacle, and Juliana had learned early on that obstacles were meant to be bypassed, never to serve as an excuse. The day went slowly after that. Sales were weak, the heat intense, and the image of that arrogant man wouldn't leave her head. Juliana tried to understand what made someone treat another person that way. Did he never need anything? Did he never look at someone and feel the slightest bit of compassion? Or did money build walls so high that it didn't let him see anything else? When the clock struck 5 in the afternoon, Juliana packed up what was left, counted the day's money, and recorded everything in the little notebook. It had been a weak day, well below average, but it was still something. She took the bus back home with her body aching and her mind tired. Donna Marta was in the kitchen when she arrived, preparing the simple dinner of rice, beans, and a fried egg. The girls were doing homework at the small living room table, and the old television showed some soap opera. "How was it today, daughter?" Marta asked without taking her eyes off the pan. It was okay. Juliana didn't want to tell her about the man in the car. It was no use worrying her mother with things she couldn't solve. After dinner, while the sisters watched cartoons, Juliana stood on the apartment's tiny balcony, looking at the city lights in the distance. Belo Horizonte was beautiful seen from above, all lit up, full of promises. But seen up close, from the height of someone living in a housing project on the outskirts, the city showed another face. It was harsh, unequal, indifferent. Juliana thought about the man in the black car. She thought about the way he looked at her, or rather how he didn't really look at her. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a nuisance. And the worst of all was knowing that, for many people, she would always be that. Invisible when convenient, annoying when she appeared. But Juliana had promised herself, On the day she decided to drop out of school to help at home, that she would not be defeated by the world's indifference. She would return to that spot tomorrow, and the day after, and every day necessary. She would sell her fruits with dignity, save every cent, and one day, in some way she didn't yet know, she would prove that she was worth much more than any man in a suit and a black car could imagine. Night fell completely over Belo Horizonte, and Juliana finally went to sleep. Tomorrow would be another day, another battle, another chance, and she would be there, standing before the sun rose, ready to start again, always ready, always standing. Eduardo Almeida woke up in his penthouse apartment on Rua Serra with the same feeling as every day. Empty. The space was immense, decorated by a renowned architect with a privileged view of the Serra do Curral, but empty. Not of furniture or expensive objects, of which there were plenty, but of that indefinable thing that turns a house into a home. He didn't even know anymore when he had stopped feeling that the place was truly his. The morning routine was mechanical. A hot shower, an Italian suit, an espresso prepared by the employee who arrived at 6 sharp, and the obsessive checking of emails on his cell phone before even finishing the first cup. Eduardo Almeida. Incorporações never stopped. New developments, meetings with investors, city hall approvals, problems with suppliers. The empire his father started and he expanded consumed every minute of the day, and Eduardo liked it that way. Work meant not thinking, and not thinking was what he wanted most. Rodrigo, his driver and security guard for over 10 years, was already waiting when he went down. The man knew the routine better than Eduardo himself. First, stop at the construction company's office in Savassi to pick up documents, then move on to meetings that would stretch through the rest of the day. "Good morning, Dr. Eduardo." Rodrigo greeted him with the usual formality, opening the car door. "Good morning." Eduardo entered without looking at the driver, his eyes already glued to the cell phone screen. The commute to the office was short, but Belo Horizonte's morning traffic turned 15 minutes into 40. Eduardo took the opportunity to answer messages, review contracts, and make decisions involving millions. There was no room for distraction, for daydreams, for anything that wasn't productive. When the car turned onto Rua Pernambuco, Eduardo looked out the window by habit, checking the surroundings of the building where his office was located. And that was when he saw her. Again. The fruit girl was there, in the same spot as the day before, with the same styrofoam box, the same upright posture, the same serene expression, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't made it clear that she wasn't welcome there. Something strange stirred inside Eduardo's chest. It wasn't regret, because he didn't regret anything. Perhaps it was irritation that she had ignored his words. Or maybe it was something else, something he couldn't name and that, for that very reason, bothered him even more. "She's there again," Rodrigo commented, also noticing the girl. "Seems so," Eduardo replied dryly, looking away. The day was long and tiring. Meetings that dragged on, problems that arose out of nowhere, people wanting his time, his attention, his approval. Eduardo circulated through that world with the ease of someone born for it, but without the slightest pleasure. They were just tasks to be fulfilled, goals to be hit, numbers to be reached. When he returned to the office in the late afternoon, the girl was still there. Eduardo saw her at a glance as the car passed. She was talking to an elderly lady, handing over fruits packed with care, smiling in a way that seemed genuine. There was something in that smile that bothered Eduardo deeply, though he didn't know why. In the following days, the scene repeated itself. Juliana was always there on the same sidewalk at the same time, selling her fruits with the patience of someone who had no other choice. Eduardo passed by in the car, saw her at a glance, and pretended he didn't see, but he did see. And the more he saw, the more that presence disturbed him. It was on Thursday of that week that something different happened. Eduardo needed to pick up documents in person at the notary's office and asked Rodrigo to park near the office. He got out of the car with the leather briefcase under his arm, eyes on his phone, completely absorbed. He didn't see the puddle of water on the sidewalk, the remains of a quick dawn rain, and he misstepped. The stumble was discreet, but enough to unbalance him. Eduardo staggered, dropped the cell phone which hit the ground with a dry thud, and felt the briefcase slip from his arm. Before he could process what was happening, a hand gripped his elbow firmly, preventing a full fall. "Careful, sir." The voice was feminine, calm, without judgment. Eduardo looked to the side and saw Juliana. She held him with one hand, while with the other she picked up the phone from the ground and held it out to him. Her face was close, and Eduardo could see her brown eyes up close for the first time. They were tired eyes, but not defeated. Eyes that had already seen a lot, but that still held something he couldn't define. "Your phone, sir." Juliana handed over the device and released his arm, taking a step back. Eduardo stood still for a moment, processing. She had helped him. After everything he said, after the humiliation, she simply helped him as if nothing had happened. There was no demand in her gaze, no rancor, nothing but a natural kindness that seemed completely detached from the context. "Thank you." The word left Eduardo's mouth almost unintentionally, an automatic reflex that he himself found strange. "You're welcome, sir." Juliana gave a small smile and returned to her spot, adjusting the fruits that had been slightly displaced when she moved to help him. Eduardo stood there for a few more seconds looking at her, before finally moving on. The rest of the day was a confusion of thoughts he couldn't organize. Why did she help him? Why didn't she take the opportunity to strike back, to humiliate him, to say everything she surely wanted to say? That attitude made no sense in Eduardo's world, where every action had an intention, every gesture was calculated, every word had a price. At night, alone in the immense apartment, Eduardo found himself thinking about her again. Not just about the afternoon's episode, but about everything. The way she organized the fruits with care, her upright posture even after hours on her feet, the patience with which she served each customer, the smile she offered even when the day seemed bad. There was a dignity there he wasn't used to seeing, especially not in someone doing such simple work. Eduardo poured an expensive whiskey and sat in the armchair facing the glass window overlooking the lit city. Belo Horizonte sparkled down there, full of lives happening simultaneously, each with its own battles, its own stories. He never thought about that. People were just elements on his life's chessboard, pieces that moved or were moved as needed. But that girl, somehow, had refused to be just a piece. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Marcella, a businesswoman with whom he had maintained a casual relationship for a few months. Nothing serious, nothing deep, just occasional company for social events and nights when neither of them wanted to be alone. "Hi, Eduardo. I thought about stopping by today. I miss you." Her voice was calculatedly seductive, but Eduardo felt absolutely nothing upon hearing it. "Not today, Marcella. I'm tired." He hung up before she could insist. The truth was that Eduardo was tired. Not the kind of tiredness that a night's sleep solves, but that deep existential tiredness that came from living an entire life on autopilot. He was 42 years old, had a fortune most people couldn't spend in 3 lifetimes, properties spread across Minas Gerais and other states, political influence, respect in the business world. And yet, sitting there in that expensive armchair, drinking imported whiskey, Eduardo felt he had absolutely nothing. In the following days, he started paying attention, not in an obvious way, but at a glance while passing by in the car. He observed that Juliana always arrived at the same time, that she chose the fruits with discretion, that she treated every customer with the same politeness, regardless of who they were. He saw her put coins into an old tin with almost reverent care. He saw her refuse change from a lady who insisted, saying she didn't need it. He saw her share a banana with a homeless man who passed by asking for food. Each small scene was like a puzzle piece Eduardo tried to assemble. Who was that girl? Why did she do that? Where did she live? Who did she live with? What were her dreams? The questions arose without permission, invading his mind at inopportune moments, during important meetings in the middle of the night while reading contracts. It was on a Saturday, when Eduardo stopped by the office to resolve pending matters, that he saw something that made him stop. Juliana was talking to a boy of about 10, far too thin, dirty clothes, clearly living on the street. She handed him a bag of fruit and even placed some coins in his small hand. The boy thanked her and ran off, and Juliana stood there, watching him disappear around the corner, with an expression that mixed sadness and something more. Eduardo got out of the car without thinking much, moved by an impulse he couldn't control. He walked to her spot, and Juliana saw him approaching. For a second, he thought he would see fear or anger in her eyes, but there was none of that. Just a polite neutrality, almost professional. "Do you always do that?" Eduardo asked, pointing in the direction the boy had gone. "Do what, sir?" Juliana arranged the mangoes that were in front. "Give food and money to those who can't pay." "When I can, I give," Juliana replied simply without fanfare, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Why?" The question came out more abruptly than Eduardo intended. Juliana stopped what she was doing and looked at him for the first time with full attention. "Because I know what it's like to be hungry, sir. And because if everyone who could help a little bit did, maybe the world would be different." The answer was so direct, so devoid of pretension or pretty speech, that Eduardo was left speechless. He, who always had an answer for everything, who negotiated million-dollar contracts with a sharp tongue, simply didn't know what to say. "Do you need any fruit today, sir?" Juliana asked, returning to professional mode. "No, Eduardo hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't come. "I just wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you helped me that day after everything I said." Juliana gave a light sigh, as if the answer were too obvious to need explanation. "Because you needed help at that moment, sir, and because I'm not the kind of person who lets someone fall, no matter who they are." Eduardo stood there still, feeling something strange happen inside him. It was as if a tiny crack had opened in a wall he had built over years, and now an uncomfortable light was leaking through, illuminating dark corners he preferred to keep in the dark. He went back to the car without saying anything else, but the conversation echoed in his head all day, all night, and in the days that followed. Juliana wasn't just a girl selling fruit. She was someone with solid principles, with a silent strength that came from somewhere deep, with a humanity Eduardo hadn't seen in a long time. And for the first time in years, Eduardo Almeida wondered if the problem wasn't in the world out there, but inside himself. Monday began differently for Eduardo. For the first time in years, he woke up thinking about something that wasn't work. Juliana's image was stuck in his mind, especially that sentence, "Because I know what it's like to be hungry." The words echoed with a force he couldn't ignore, bringing to the surface memories Eduardo had buried deep a long time ago. He got up and went to the enormous closet, where dozens of suits were organized by color and occasion. In the back, in an old box he never opened, was kept a piece of the past he preferred to forget. Eduardo took the box, blew the dust off the lid, and opened it slowly. Inside there were old photos, yellowed documents, and a worn-out little notebook. It was the notebook his mother, Donna Helena, used to record expenses when Eduardo was a child. He leafed through the pages carefully, seeing his mother's shaky handwriting recording every cent spent on rice, beans, bus fare. The family lived in the Santa Teresa neighborhood, in a simple house that shared a wall with 5 other families. His father, Su Antonio, was a bricklayer, and his mother was a seamstress. Eduardo remembered the smell of thin coffee in the morning, clothes ironed to last longer, shoes that were only bought when the old ones no longer fit. Life changed when Su Antonio had the luck to work on a large construction project and impress the owner of the company. The man saw potential in the dedicated bricklayer and promoted him to foreman, then to manager, and finally to a minority partner. It was the beginning of the climb. Eduardo was 15 when the family left the simple house and moved to a better apartment. At 20, he was already studying administration at a private university paid for with his father's sweat. At 25, he inherited the company when Su Antonio passed away suddenly, leaving a legacy of honest work and business vision. Eduardo expanded everything. He multiplied the assets, opened new fronts, invested heavily, and in the process he distanced himself more and more from his origins. He changed his surname in his documents, swapping Santos for Almeida, which sounded more refined. He cut contact with old friends from the neighborhood. He invented a more palatable story about his childhood when asked. He built a new identity that erased the poor boy who once felt ashamed to take a lunchbox to school. Looking now at that old notebook, Eduardo felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. But not shame of his origins, rather shame of having denied them. Shame of having become exactly the kind of person he himself would have hated as a child. Shame of having looked at Juliana with the same contempt others looked at his mother when she sold sewing door to door. He closed the box slowly and returned to the routine, but something had changed. The crack in the wall grew larger, and now Eduardo could no longer pretend it didn't exist. In the office, he called Rodrigo for a private conversation. The driver was discreet and loyal, qualities Eduardo valued above all else. "Rodrigo, do you know the girl who sells fruit on Rua Pernambuco?" "I know her by sight, doctor. She's always there." The driver replied, curious about the question. "I want you to find out a few things about her. Where she lives, who she lives with, what the family situation is." But discreetly understood, "I don't want her to know." "Leave it to me, doctor. I'll investigate." 2 days later, Rodrigo returned with the information. Juliana Ferreira da Silva, 17 years old, resident of the Vila Nova Cachoeirinha housing complex in the Lindeia neighborhood. Mother is a cleaner, father absent since she was 5. 2 younger sisters, Beatriz, 12, and Amanda, 8. Juliana had dropped out of school in her first year of high school to work and help at home. She had been selling fruit for 3 years, every day, without missing one. She had a reputation as a serious, hard-working girl who never owed anyone anything. Eduardo listened to everything in silence, processing each piece of information. 17 years old, the same age he was when he started college with everything paid for, while she dropped out of her studies to sell fruit on the street. The injustice of it all hit him like a punch to the stomach. "Anything else, doctor?" Rodrigo asked. "No, thank you." Eduardo dismissed the driver and stayed alone in the office, looking out the window at the city outside. That afternoon, he cancelled all meetings and went personally to Rua Pernambuco. Juliana was there, as always, serving a customer with patience. Eduardo stayed on the other side of the street, watching. He saw when she finished the sale, when she counted the money and recorded it in the little notebook, when she arranged the fruit again with the usual care. When the customer left, Eduardo crossed the street and approached. Juliana saw him coming and had a moment of surprise, but quickly regained her professional expression. "Good afternoon, sir. Would you like any fruit today?" "Good afternoon." Eduardo hesitated, searching for the right words. "I wanted to talk to you if you have a few minutes." Juliana looked around, seeing that there were no other customers nearby at the moment. "You can speak, sir." "About that day when I was rude to you." Eduardo spoke slowly, each word costing an immense effort. "I wanted to apologize." Juliana's face didn't change much, but Eduardo saw a flash of surprise in her eyes. "It's all right, sir. It's past." "It's not all right," Eduardo insisted. "I had no right to speak to you that way. You were working honestly and I was an idiot." Juliana remained silent for a moment, studying his face as if trying to understand if it was sincere or some kind of trap. Finally, she gave a small smile. "You don't need to apologize, sir, but I accept. We all have bad days, right?" "It wasn't a bad day. I'm always like that," Eduardo admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Or at least I was. I don't know anymore." "What changed?" "You." The answer came out before Eduardo could filter it. "Seeing you work, seeing how you treat people, how you help even when you don't have to. It made me think about a lot of things I didn't want to think about." Juliana looked down, moving the fruit unnecessarily, clearly not knowing how to react to that. "You give me too much credit, sir. I only do what needs to be done." "That's exactly it." Eduardo took a step closer. "Most people don't even do what's needed. They do the minimum, or not even that. But you do it, and you do it with dignity, with care. That is rare." An awkward silence settled between them. Juliana clearly wasn't used to compliments, much less from that kind of person. Eduardo also wasn't used to saying things like that, to opening up, to showing vulnerability. "Why are you telling me this, sir?" Juliana asked, her voice low but firm. "Because I grew up similar to you." Eduardo spoke and felt a strange relief saying it out loud. "My mother was a seamstress. My father was a bricklayer. We lived in a shack in Santa Teresa, and there were days when there was only rice to eat. I know what it's like to wake up early, work hard, and still not be sure if you'll manage everything." Juliana looked at him with renewed attention, as if she was seeing him for the first time. "And what happened?" "My father got lucky, worked hard and managed to grow in life. He gave me opportunities he never had." Eduardo paused, feeling the weight of the next confession. "And I used those opportunities to become everything I hated when I was poor. I became arrogant, cold, indifferent. I forgot where I came from, who I was. And now," Juliana asked softly, "now I'm trying to remember, or maybe learn again." Eduardo looked at her with a sincerity that scared even himself. "And you, without knowing, without wanting to, are teaching me." Juliana stayed quiet for a long moment, eyes fixed on him, trying to process all of that. Finally she spoke, with a wisdom that seemed far beyond 17 years. "Look, sir, I don't know what you expect from me, but I'm not anyone's teacher. I'm not an example of anything. I wake up early and sell fruit because I need to, because my mother is tired, because my sisters need to study, because the bills don't pay themselves. There's nothing special about that." "There is," Eduardo insisted. "There is dignity, there is honor. There is a strength most people will never have because they never needed to have it, and that, whether you believe it or not, is worth more than all the money I have." The words hung in the air between them. Juliana looked away, visibly moved, and Eduardo realized he might have gone too far, too fast. "I'll let you work." He took a step back. "I just wanted you to know that I apologize to you truly, and that if you ever need anything, anything at all, you can count on me." "Why would you do that, sir?" Juliana asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Because I owe it. Not to you specifically, but to life, to all the people I treated poorly because I thought I was better than them." Eduardo felt a knot in his throat. "And because I want to be different. I want to be the kind of person my mother would be proud of." Juliana looked at him for one more moment and then nodded slowly. "All right, sir, thank you." Eduardo went back to the car with his heart racing and his hands trembling slightly. He had just done something he had never done in his life: admit his flaws, apologize truly, show vulnerability to someone who had no obligation to forgive him. And strangely, instead of feeling weak, Eduardo felt lighter than he had in years. That night, alone in the apartment, he took his mother's old notebook again and read every page carefully. Donna Helena recorded everything with such care, such affection, such respect for every cent earned. She never complained, never gave up, never lost her sweetness even on the most difficult days. Eduardo remembered the way she treated everyone with kindness, the way she shared the little she had, the way she believed things would get better. Juliana was just like her. She had the same fiber, the same silent dignity, the same capacity to remain human even when the world insisted on being cruel. And Eduardo, who had spent 20 years trying to forget where he came from, finally understood that that was his greatest loss. Not the years of poverty, but the years in which he chose to let die everything his parents had taught him about character, empathy, and humanity. The transformation had begun, and Eduardo knew there was no turning back. The following weeks brought a subtle but significant change in both their routines. Eduardo began passing through Rua Pernambuco more frequently, always finding some excuse to stop and talk for a few minutes with Juliana. Sometimes he bought fruit he wasn't even going to eat, just to have a reason. Other times he simply stopped the car and talked from the window, asking how the day had been, if sales were good, if she needed anything. Juliana, for her part, was gradually letting her guard down. In the beginning, she treated Eduardo with the same professional politeness she dedicated to any customer, but over time, she allowed the conversations to stretch a bit longer, for the subjects to go beyond the trivial. She started telling small things about her day, about her sisters, about her mother. Nothing very intimate, but enough for Eduardo to understand that she was slowly beginning to trust him. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything changed levels. The sky darkened suddenly in the middle of the afternoon, and a typical Belo Horizonte storm broke without warning. Juliana tried to protect the fruit with plastic, but the rain was too strong. Eduardo, who was returning from a meeting, saw the scene and told Rodrigo to stop the car. "Get in the car, you're going to get sick," he shouted through the window with the rain drumming on the roof. "I can't leave the fruit, sir," Juliana shouted back, soaked, trying to cover the merchandise. Eduardo got out of the car without thinking twice, took an instant soaking, and helped her put everything in the trunk. The fruit, the styrofoam box, the towel, everything. When they finished, both were completely wet. "Come, get in." Eduardo opened the back door and Juliana hesitated only a second before entering. Rodrigo turned on the heater and handed over towels he kept in the car. "Thank you, sir. Sorry for wetting everything." Juliana spoke, shivering with cold, trying to dry herself with the towel. "Forget that. Where do you live? I'll take you." Eduardo was also drying himself, his Italian suit completely ruined, but he didn't even seem to care. "No need, sir. I'll take the bus when it stops raining." "Juliana, you're shivering. I'm going to take you home. It's not a request, it's a statement." His voice was firm but gentle. Juliana looked at him, then at Rodrigo, then at her own wet hands. Finally, she sighed and gave the address. Villa Nova Cachoeirinha Complex, Lindea. The commute was silent at first. Eduardo noticed how Juliana was tense, eyes fixed on the window, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He understood. She probably had never ridden in a car like that, had never received this kind of attention, and surely was wondering what he wanted in return. When they arrived at the housing complex, Eduardo saw the place with different eyes. Simple buildings, peeling paint, children playing in the street even as the rain let up. It was similar, very similar, to the place where he grew up. Nostalgia came mixed with a pang of guilt. "It's there." Juliana pointed to one of the blocks. Eduardo told Rodrigo to stop and got out to help take the things from the trunk. "Thank you again, sir." Juliana took the styrofoam box, but Eduardo held the other side. "Let me help you up. Which floor?" "Third. But you don't need to, sir." "I know I don't need to. I want to." And before she could protest further, Eduardo was already carrying the box up the stairs. The apartment was tiny. Integrated living room and kitchen, 2 bedrooms that barely fit the beds, a cramped bathroom. But it was clean, organized, with that care that only those who have little give to the little they have. Donna Marta was in the kitchen when they entered, and she was visibly surprised to see her daughter accompanied by a man in a wet suit carrying the fruit box. "Mother, this is Mr. Eduardo. He gave me a ride because of the rain." Juliana introduced him, nervous. "Very nice to meet you, Donna Marta." Eduardo held out his hand with sincerity. "Sorry for showing up like this without notice." Marta shook his hand, still processing the scene. "A pleasure. Want some coffee? You're still wet. You'll catch a cold." Eduardo was going to refuse out of politeness, but something in the woman's hopeful gaze made him accept. "I do, thank you very much." While Marta prepared the coffee, Juliana's 2 sisters appeared, curious. Beatriz and Amanda looked at Eduardo with that mix of shyness and interest that children have for different people. He smiled at them, and Amanda smiled back. "Are you rich?" the girl asked with the brutal sincerity of childhood. "Amanda," Juliana reprimanded, red with shame. "It's okay." Eduardo laughed, and it was a genuine laugh that surprised even himself. "I have money, yes, but I'm learning that it's not the most important thing." "And what is?" Amanda insisted, sitting in the chair next to him. Eduardo looked at Juliana, who was leaning against the kitchen doorframe, and then at Donna Marta, who brought the simple coffee in a mismatched cup. He looked at the small but life-filled apartment, at the photos on the wall, at the girls' drawings stuck to the fridge with tape. "Family," he replied, feeling the truth of that word for the first time in a long time. "And character. Doing the right thing even when it's hard. That's what matters." The coffee was drunk in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when different people meet on common ground, still discovering how to navigate that new space. When Eduardo stood up to leave, Donna Marta accompanied him to the door. "Thank you for taking care of my girl." Her voice was low, but loaded with emotion. "You have an incredible daughter, Donna Marta. You must be very proud." "I am. She is my strength." Marta looked at Juliana, who was putting the fruit away. "Since she was little, it was always like this, too responsible for her age. Sometimes I'm afraid she's losing her youth taking care of us. She will have time to live." Eduardo spoke with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I will ensure that." In the following days, Eduardo couldn't stop thinking about Juliana's family. Donna Marta working until her body ached, Juliana dropping out of school to help, the little girls growing up in a cramped but love-filled apartment. It was his story all over again, only this time he was on the other side. This time he had the power to change things. He called a meeting with his lawyers and accountant. He wanted to create a fund, a scholarship, something that would allow Juliana to return to school, finish high school, maybe even go to college. He wanted to help Donna Marta too, maybe finding her a better job with a formal contract, benefits. He wanted to do all this, but he knew he needed to be careful. Juliana had pride, dignity. She wouldn't accept charity. She wouldn't accept being treated as a social project. It was Rodrigo who gave the idea. "Doctor, why don't you offer her a job? That way it doesn't look like a handout, it looks like an opportunity." Eduardo thought about the suggestion. It made sense. He had a huge company. Surely there was room for someone as dedicated and responsible as Juliana. The problem was convincing her. 2 days later, he went to her spot armed with courage and a somewhat crazy plan. Juliana was selling mangoes when he arrived. "Good morning, can I talk to you?" "Good morning, Mr. Eduardo, you can." Juliana finished serving the customer and turned to him. "I have a proposal." Eduardo went straight to the point. "I want you to work with me." Juliana blinked, confused. "How so, sir?" "In my company. I need someone in the administrative sector, someone organized, punctual, reliable. You have all those qualities." "Sir, I didn't even finish high school. I don't know anything about offices, computers, those things." Her voice was skeptical. "You learn," Eduardo insisted, "and while you work, you study. I'll pay for a course for you to finish high school at night, and then we'll see about college. The salary is much better than what you earn selling fruit. It has benefits, a formal contract, everything properly done." Juliana stayed quiet for a long moment, eyes fixed on him, trying to understand the catch. "Why are you doing this, sir?" "Because you deserve it." Eduardo spoke with sincerity. "Because you are intelligent, hard-working, and you deserve a chance. And because, being very honest, I owe it, not to you specifically, but to the world, to the opportunities I was given when I was young." "This is charity," Juliana spoke, her voice low but firm. "It's not. It's work. You will work, you will earn your salary, you will earn your space. No one is going to give you anything for free. But I'm going to give you the opportunity to show what you are capable of. Accept it or don't, the choice is yours." Juliana looked away, clearly in conflict. Eduardo could see the internal struggle happening. Pride versus necessity, distrust versus hope, fear versus courage. Finally, she looked back at him. "I need to think. I need to talk to my mother." "Of course, no pressure." Eduardo handed her a business card. "This is my number. Call me when you decide." That night at home, Juliana told Donna Marta everything. Her mother listened in silence, hands busy peeling potatoes for dinner, but eyes attentive to every word from her daughter. "And you, what do you think?" Marta asked when Juliana finished. "I don't know, Mother. It seems too good to be true. No one gives an opportunity like that without wanting something in return." "Maybe he does want something, daughter. Maybe he wants to feel better about himself, but that doesn't change the fact that you deserve this chance." Marta dropped the potato and held her daughter's hands. "Juju, you've worked hard for 3 years. You wake up at dawn, you endure sun, rain, disrespect. You do all this without complaining. If this man is offering a way for you to have a better life, why not accept? And if it goes wrong? And if it goes right?" Marta squeezed her hands. "Daughter, you can't be afraid to accept help. Pride is good, but it can't be a prison. If he's offering honest work, a fair salary, and a chance to study, you should at least try." Juliana looked at her mother, saw the tiredness in her eyes, the wrinkles that shouldn't be there yet, the calloused hands from cleaning others' houses. And she made the decision. The next day she called Eduardo. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Eduardo, it's Juliana." "Hi, Juliana, have you decided?" "I have, I accept, but on one condition." "What?" "If at any point you think I'm not managing, that I'm not fit for the job, you fire me. No pity, no mercy, I don't want to be kept out of charity." Eduardo smiled on the other end of the line. "Deal, you start next Monday." When she hung up, Juliana felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different, that she could be more than the girl who sold fruit, that she could have a future that went beyond surviving. And Eduardo, putting the phone away, felt something similar. For the first time in 20 years, he was doing something that really mattered. Not for money, not for status, not out of obligation, but because it was right. Because that girl deserved it. And because he was finally learning what his father tried to teach his whole life. That true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give back to the world. Monday arrived loaded with anxiety and expectation. Juliana woke up at 4:30 as always, but this time it wasn't to sell fruit. It was to start a completely new life. She got ready with care, wearing the only clothes she had that were minimally suitable for an office. Black pants her mother had sewn specially, and a simple white blouse. Her shoes were old, but she had cleaned and polished them until they were presentable. Donna Marta prepared a special breakfast, using the eggs that were kept for an important occasion. The sisters woke up early just to say goodbye, excited about the news. Amanda hugged Juliana tightly. "You're going to rock it, sis." Juliana left home with her heart racing, took 2 buses to the Savassi region, and arrived in front of the Eduardo Almeida Incorporações building 15 minutes early. The building was imposing, all mirrored glass, with an entrance hall that seemed larger than the entire apartment where she lived. She stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, gathering courage. When she finally entered, the receptionist greeted her with a professional smile. "Good morning, you must be Juliana. Dr. Eduardo already let us know. You can go up, 12th floor." The elevator was mirrored, and Juliana saw herself reflected from all angles. She looked like a girl out of place, an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. Insecurity came in force, but she took a deep breath and remembered her mother's words, "You deserve this chance." Eduardo was waiting for her in his office, but he wasn't alone. There was a woman of about 50, hair tied in an impeccable bun, elegant business attire, and a gaze that analyzed everything with precision. "Juliana, this is Christina, the manager of the administrative sector. You will work with her." Eduardo made the introductions with an encouraging smile. "A pleasure." Christina held out her hand and Juliana shook it, trying not to show her nervousness. "A pleasure, ma'am." Christina was professional, but not exactly warm. She showed Juliana her desk, a computer that looked like it came from the future, and a stack of manuals about the company's procedures. "You'll start with simple tasks, organizing files, answering the phone, making some registrations in the system. As you get the hang of it, we'll increase the responsibilities." Christina explained quickly, without much patience for doubts. "Yes, ma'am, I'll take care of it." Juliana wrote everything down in a little notebook, the same one she used to record fruit sales. The first days were brutal. Juliana had never really used a computer, and each task seemed like a monumental challenge. Typing was slow. Finding files was confusing. The company system had 1,000 menus she didn't understand. But she didn't give up. She stayed late, took doubts home, asked colleagues for help even when she saw some of them rolling their eyes. There was one employee, Patricia, who was especially difficult. She was the same age as Juliana but had already been working there for 2 years and clearly felt threatened by the newcomer who had arrived by direct recommendation of the boss. "Must be good to have an inside connection, right?" Patricia commented loud enough for Juliana to hear during the lunch break. Juliana pretended she didn't hear, but the sentence hurt. It hurt because it touched on an insecurity she already had. Was she there by merit or out of pity? Did Eduardo only hire her out of guilt and not because he really believed in her? Eduardo noticed the difficulty Juliana was having, but deliberately kept his distance. He didn't want the other employees to think she had special treatment, but he observed from afar, saw her effort, the way she arrived early and left late, how she asked for help without excessive pride, how she recorded everything with the attention of someone who couldn't afford a mistake. It was in the second week that things began to turn. Juliana was organizing some files when she found an inconsistency. 2 invoices with duplicate numbering, different values, suspicious dates. She took the problem to Christina, who initially thought it was a misinterpretation by the newcomer. But when she checked, she discovered Juliana was right. There had been an error in the purchasing sector that could have been costly if not identified. "Good work, girl." Christina spoke, and for the first time there was genuine approval in her voice. "You have an eye for detail." From then on, Juliana began to gain respect. Not from everyone, Patricia continued with her snide remarks, but from people who mattered. Christina started trusting her with more tasks. Eduardo received weekly reports on her performance, and all were positive. But the true impact of the change was felt at home. With a fixed salary, Donna Marta was able to reduce from 3 to 2 houses where she worked, relieving her punished body. Beatrice and Amanda got new school supplies, books, a small luxury every now and then. The apartment received small repairs that had been postponed for years, and Juliana started her high school course at night, fulfilling the promise she had made to herself. On a Friday afternoon, 3 months after starting, Eduardo called Juliana into his office. She entered nervously, thinking she had done something wrong. "Sit down." Eduardo pointed to the chair. "I want to talk to you." "Did something happen, sir?" "Yes, you're doing very well. Christina only speaks well of you. The reports are excellent. You exceeded any expectation I had." Juliana felt relief mixed with pride. "Thank you, sir. I'm trying to give my best." "And you're succeeding." Eduardo leaned forward, eyes serious but gentle. "That's why I want to make a proposal. I want you to take a technical administration course on Saturdays. The company pays, and when you finish, we'll promote you to a better position with a higher salary." Juliana was speechless for a moment. "Sir, that's too much. I don't know what to say." "Say you accept." Eduardo smiled. "You deserve it, Juliana. It's not a favor, it's an investment. You are intelligent, dedicated, you learn fast. I want you to grow here, to build a career, to be more than just an employee." Juliana's eyes filled with tears she tried to control. "Why do you do this for me? After everything I am, where I came from?" "Exactly for that." Eduardo stood up and went to the window, looking at the city outside. "Because I came from the same place as you, Juliana, and someone gave me a chance when I needed it. My father was a bricklayer, became a manager, became a partner, because someone believed in him. I'm doing the same for you, not out of charity, but because I recognize in you the same thing that man recognized in my father, potential." He turned to her, and there was a vulnerability in his gaze Juliana had never seen. "But there's something else. You taught me something I had forgotten. You taught me that money doesn't define character, that dignity doesn't depend on a bank account, that the way you treat people says more about you than any position or title. You made me remember who I was before I got lost in this world." Juliana stood up as well, discreetly wiping away the tears. "You weren't lost, sir. You had just forgotten the way home, but you were still the same person inside." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Eduardo realized at that moment that Juliana had become much more than an employee. She was a mirror of what he could have been if he had maintained the values his parents taught. She was a constant reminder that success without humanity is empty, and she was in a way his salvation. In the following months, Juliana flourished. The technical course was challenging, but she faced it with the same determination as always. At work, she was promoted to administrative assistant, with a salary increase. At home, the changes were visible. Donna Marta finally managed to stop working in one of the houses, staying with only one. The girls were doing well in school, with good grades and plans for the future. The apartment got a new television, a refrigerator that didn't constantly break down. Small comforts that made a difference in daily life. But not everything was perfect. Patricia and a few other colleagues continued with veiled hostility. There were comments about Juliana's rapid rise, insinuations that she had questionable methods for achieving what she did. Juliana heard them. It hurt. But she moved forward. She knew she owed nothing to anyone, that every conquest was hard-earned, that every promotion was deserved. There was one day, however, when the situation reached its limit. Juliana was in the pantry preparing coffee when she heard Patricia talking to 2 other employees, not knowing she was there. "The girl arrived selling fruit on the street, and in 6 months she's almost a manager. Tell me another one." Patricia spoke with venom in her voice. "Yeah, she must have her methods. Everyone knows how she got the job." Another added, laughing. Juliana felt the anger rise, but before she could react, a male voice cut through the conversation. "Christina told me there are people here talking about others' lives instead of working." It was Eduardo. He had just arrived and heard part of the conversation. The 3 employees turned white. "Do you have some problem with Juliana's competence, or just with the fact that she works harder than you?" Eduardo asked, his voice cold. "Sorry, Dr. Eduardo, we were just—" Patricia tried to explain. "You were just spreading malicious gossip about a colleague who is here on merit." Eduardo cut her off. "If I hear one more comment of this type about her or any other employee, there will be serious consequences. Understood?" "Yes, sir," the 3 replied in unison and left quickly. Juliana came out of the pantry, and Eduardo saw her. Their eyes met, and he shook his head slightly as if saying not to mind it. But Juliana did mind. She minded because it confirmed her fears, because it showed that no matter how hard she worked, there would always be those who questioned her value. At night at home, she vented to her mother. Maybe I shouldn't have accepted, Mother. People think I got everything easily, that I don't deserve it. And do you care what those people think? Donna Marta asked firm. Daughter, envy will always exist, people will always talk, but you know the truth. You work hard, study, dedicate yourself. If there are people who don't see that, it's their problem, not yours. Juliana knew her mother was right, but it still hurt. It hurt because she never wanted anything for free, never asked for a favor, always fought for everything, and even so she was judged, questioned, diminished. But she didn't give up. She kept working, studying, proving day after day that she was there by merit. And gradually, even the most skeptical began to respect her. Because it's hard to deny someone's competence when the results speak for themselves. Eduardo, observing everything from a distance, felt a pride he had never felt before. Not pride of possession or power, but genuine pride in seeing someone grow, develop, reach their potential. And he realized that, in the process of helping Juliana, he had helped himself too. He had rediscovered purpose, meaning the essence of who he was, before he got lost in money and empty success. The transformation was complete, but the story was not over yet. There was one last chapter, one last revelation, one last step to close the cycle and consolidate everything both had learned on that unexpected journey that began with a chance encounter on a Belo Horizonte sidewalk. A year and a half had passed since that rainy morning when Eduardo first found Juliana selling fruit. Belo Horizonte continued to be the same city of contrasts, but both their lives had changed completely. Juliana was sitting in the audience of the company auditorium, wearing a business suit she had bought with her own salary. Beside her, Donna Marta wore a new dress, her eyes shining with pride. Beatrice and Amanda, a bit bored with the formality of the event, still sat upright, well-behaved, knowing that was an important moment for their sister. It was the graduation ceremony for the technical administration course. 20 students, from different partner companies, receiving their diplomas after 2 years of intense study on Saturdays. Juliana had been the top student in the class, with a final average of 97 points. When they called her name, she walked onto the stage with the upright posture she had never lost, the same dignity as when she sold fruit on the street, but now with a new confidence, earned cent by cent, study by study, challenge by challenge. Eduardo was in the front row, applauding sincerely. Beside him, Christina also applauded, and this time there were no more reservations. The manager had become Juliana's mentor, recognizing in her a potential successor. When the ceremony ended, the families mingled at the cocktail party. Juliana was surrounded by classmates congratulating her, teachers praising her, and even Patricia, who had finally swallowed her pride, came to greet her with sincerity. "Congratulations, Juliana, you deserved it." Patricia's voice was genuine. "And sorry for everything I said before, I was wrong." Juliana shook her hand and smiled. "It's all right, we learn from our mistakes, right? Both mine and yours." Later, when most people had already left, Eduardo approached Juliana and her family. Donna Marta hugged him with the familiarity of someone who already knew him well, and the girls gave an excited wave. "Congratulations, Juliana." Eduardo handed over an envelope. "This is for you." Juliana opened it and found an official promotion letter. She would be the coordinator of the administrative sector, with a salary almost 3 times higher than when she started. Her eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Eduardo, this is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It's deserved. You prove to everyone, and especially to yourself, that you are capable." Eduardo placed his hand on her shoulder, an almost fatherly gesture. "I'm proud of you." That night, Juliana went home by taxi, a luxury she could now allow herself every now and then. On the way, she looked out the window at the lit streets of Belo Horizonte and thought about everything that had changed. She was no longer the girl who woke up at 4:30 to choose fruit at Sisa. She was no longer the teenager who had dropped out of school out of necessity. She was a qualified professional, with a diploma, with a career, with a future. But deep down, in the deepest part of her heart, she was still the same. She still had the same values, the same dignity, the same silent strength. Money had changed the circumstances, but it hadn't changed who she was. And that, Juliana knew, was what really mattered. 2 months later, Eduardo called an extraordinary meeting at the company. All employees were summoned to the auditorium, and there was an air of apprehension. When Eduardo took the stage, however, there was no tension on his face. There was something different, something that Juliana from the third row recognized immediately: peace. "Good morning, everyone," Eduardo began, his voice firm but gentle. "I called you here today to make an important announcement. In recent months, I have been reflecting a lot on our company's purpose, on my own purpose, and on what success truly means." He paused, looking at the people gathered there. "When my father founded this company, he had a simple dream: to build houses so that families would have a dignified place to live. Over time, that dream turned into numbers, profits, expansion, and at some point I lost sight of what really mattered. Really." Juliana felt her heart race. Somehow she knew what was coming. "That is why I am announcing today the creation of the Helena Santos Foundation," Eduardo continued, and there was emotion in his voice now. "Helena was my mother, a woman who worked her whole life sewing to support the family, who never had the opportunity to study, but who taught me everything about character, dignity, and compassion. The foundation will offer scholarships, professional training, and job opportunities for young people in situations of social vulnerability. We are going to invest in people, in potential, in futures that deserve to be built." The auditorium was silent for a moment, and then exploded in applause. Eduardo waited for the emotion to subside before continuing. "And to coordinate this foundation, I chose someone who knows firsthand what it is to fight for an opportunity. Someone who never gave up, even when it would have been easier to give up. Someone who taught me, without knowing it, the true meaning of transformation." Eduardo looked directly at Juliana. "Juliana Ferreira da Silva, do you accept this challenge?" Juliana stood paralyzed for a second, her brain trying to process what she had just heard. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Christina, beside her, nudged her gently. "Go on, girl." With her legs trembling, Juliana stood up and walked to the stage. When she reached Eduardo, he held out his hand, but she ignored it and hugged him. It was a quick hug, but loaded with everything words could not express: gratitude, respect, mutual recognition of two people who saved each other without realizing it. "I accept, Mr. Eduardo," Juliana spoke, her voice choked with emotion, "and I will do my best to honor your mother's memory and help as many people as I can." That night at home, Juliana's family celebrated. Donna Marta cried with joy, saying she never imagined life could take so many turns. The girls jumped excitedly, making wild plans about the future. And Juliana, in the middle of that happy chaos, felt a fulfillment she had never felt before. She thought of Eduardo, alone in his immense apartment, but probably not feeling so alone anymore. She thought about how a chance encounter had changed two lives completely. She thought about how life had strange ways of putting the right people in each other's paths at the right time. Weeks later, the Helena Santos Foundation was officially inaugurated in a moving ceremony. Eduardo insisted it be in the Santa Teresa neighborhood, where he grew up, in the renovated building of an old municipal school. Juliana was beside him on the stage, now as the official coordinator of the project, presenting the programs that were going to be offered. The first cycle of the foundation was going to serve 50 young people. Professional courses, psychological monitoring, career guidance, and scholarships for those who wanted to continue in formal education. Everything free, all with the goal of giving real opportunities to those who needed them most. In the audience, Donna Marta sat beside several other mothers, all with similar stories, all with children who deserved a chance. Beside her, in a chair of honor, was a framed photo of Donna Helena, the seamstress who never imagined her name would one day be on a social foundation. When Eduardo looked at that photo, he finally felt he had honored his parents' memory, not with money, not with an empire, not with power, but with action, with purpose, with the conscious decision to use his privileges to open doors for others. And Juliana, looking at the 50 young people who were there, saw in each face a bit of herself, the same mixture of hope and fear, of determination and insecurity, of big dreams and difficult circumstances. She knew exactly what each of them was feeling because she had felt the same thing. And now she was on the other side, being able to be for them what Eduardo had been for her. A bridge, an opportunity, an extended hand. The following months were intense. Juliana dived headfirst into the foundation's work, balancing it with her responsibilities at the company. Eduardo supported her in everything, but let her lead, trusting completely in her ability. And Juliana did not disappoint. She knew that reality from the inside. She knew exactly what worked and what didn't, what kind of support made a difference, and what kind was merely palliative. The first group of young people began to graduate, to get jobs, to return to school. Stories of transformation began to multiply, each one unique, each one important. And Juliana documented everything, knowing that each story was proof that change was possible, that origin did not determine destiny, that dignity and opportunity could walk together. Eduardo, observing everything from afar, sometimes wondered how he had lived so long without feeling that deep satisfaction of seeing lives changing, of knowing his money was making a real difference, of using his privilege to create equity. He still managed the company, still did business, still accumulated assets. But now there was purpose, there was meaning, there was a reason beyond profit. And whenever he felt lost or questioned if he was on the right path, he thought of that morning when he saw a 17-year-old girl selling fruit with more dignity than most of the businessmen he knew. He thought about how he had been arrogant, cruel, blind, and he thought about how that same girl, instead of striking back with anger, had chosen to teach by example. On a sunny Saturday, nearly 2 years after the first encounter, Eduardo was visiting the foundation when he saw Juliana talking to a new girl, clearly nervous, first day of the course. Juliana spoke with patience, with kindness, with the wisdom of someone who had already been through that. And Eduardo saw at that moment the full cycle. Juliana was no longer the girl receiving help. She was the woman giving back to the world, multiplying opportunities, transforming her own story into a bridge for others. He approached after the girl had left. How was her first day? She's nervous, insecure, thinking she won't manage. Juliana smiled, just like I was. And what did you say to her? I said the same thing you said to me one day, that she is capable, that she will learn, that she deserves this chance. Juliana looked at Eduardo with gratitude that never diminished, and that sometimes we need to believe in the vision others have of us until we can have that vision of ourselves. Eduardo nodded, feeling a knot in his throat. You know that everything I did for you, you've already paid back 1,000 times, right? How so? You saved me, Juliana. I was lost, empty, turning into a person I myself would despise. You showed me the way back. You reminded me of who I was, where I came from, of what really matters. Eduardo paused, moved. So thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me even when I deserved for you to give up. Juliana wiped away a discreet tear. We saved each other then. I think that's how it works. No one transforms alone. We need mirrors, people who show our best and worst sides. You were my mirror, and I was yours. They stood there side by side, looking at the movement of the foundation. Young people studying, laughing, planning futures, families having hope again, stories being rewritten, one at a time. And Juliana thought with crystalline clarity that life had a strange but perfect way of making things fit. She had sold fruit on that sidewalk for 3 years, every day, without imagining it would lead her to something greater. She had found Eduardo at his worst moment, when he most needed a mirror that reflected the truth back. And together, without planning, without knowing, they had created something that went far beyond the two of them. Eduardo looked at the Belo Horizonte sky, that deep blue that had always marked the city. He thought of his mother, his father, of all they sacrificed to give him a chance. He thought of how he had nearly thrown it all away, of how he had nearly become an empty version of success. And he thought of how, in the end, he had been saved by a 17-year-old girl who simply refused to lose her humanity, no matter how much the world tried to take it from her. Their story didn't have an ending. It had a continuation, one that multiplied in every young person who passed through the foundation, in every opportunity created, in every life transformed. It was a living legacy, built on the base of 2 unlikely encounters, that of a rich man with his own lost humanity, and that of a poor girl with a dignity that no one could take away. And when the sun began to set over Belo Horizonte, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Juliana and Eduardo were still there, side by side, no longer as boss and employee, no longer as rich and poor, but as two people who found each other at the right moment and decided together to transform pain into purpose, privilege into a bridge, and indifference into active love for others. Life would continue with its challenges and surprises, its joys and difficulties, but they knew now with absolute certainty that transformation was possible, that people could change, that origins did not determine destinies, and that sometimes all someone needs is a sincere opportunity and the courage to grab it with both hands. Dear listeners, we hope that Juliana and Eduardo's story has touched your heart deeply. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, overcoming, and dignity, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Juliana's humility that inspired you, or Eduardo's transformation that made you reflect on your own choices? Share it with us. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, and remind us that it's never too late to start over, to change, to choose to be better. The story of each of you also matters. We wait for you in the next episode.